Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. We're continuing with the book, The Queen Mother, and I have looked forward to learning more about her and her family, and this book is pretty thorough. In the last video, we had the marriage of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip. It was something that Princess Elizabeth was determined to do. She thanked her parents, though, for making her wait. Her parents loved Philip and wanted their daughter to be happy, and they realized that Prince Philip could do that. So let's see what's happening today. The Labour Party had been elected to extend public ownership, and a national health service was one of the basic building blocks of the proposed welfare state. The King and Queen both understood this, but they were devoted to the idea of individual service and how this would affect the royal patronage. By the end of the war, there was a patchwork of about 1,000 charity-funded hospitals in Britain, and hundreds of them had links to the crown. Members of the royal family preserved these links for generations. These hospitals were unevenly spread across the country and of varying quality. Queen Mary, the Queen, and the Duke of Gloucester must have seen the nationalization of the charitable hospitals as an act of vandalism. No matter what they felt, Nye Bevan's bill to nationalize the hospitals passed through Parliament in November 1946, and it was due to take effect in July 1948. During this transition, members of the royal family made an effort to bolster morale in the hospitals by visiting many of them and making symbolic donations. The King, in his 1946 Christmas broadcast, used the word reconstruction to speak for the need of spiritual reconstruction. The Queen, just as the King, never criticized government policy, but she said over and over again that there was a need for individual service and for Christian commitment. The thought during this time was that they wanted centralization and collectivism. Labor ministers were convinced that the state was the embodiment of social good and that only state action could transform society. The Queen wasn't happy. Faith was her core, and even the Church of England endorsed and embraced this concept. She was concerned that the Church seemed always in retreat in the face of the march of what, like many others, she called material values. Despite the imminent nationalization, the royal family maintained the links with the hospitals they were closely associated with. In March 1948, the Queen visited the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Gateshead and made clear her enthusiasm for individual efforts, declaring that state control did not absolve us from the practice of charity or the exercise of vigilance. The English way of progress has always been to preserve good qualities and apply them to new systems. Princess Elizabeth attended the annual Court of Governors of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for Children in Hackney, of which she was president and her mother patron. Referring to the members of the court whose years of work would soon be rewarded by compulsory retirement, she was frank. "I feel a very special regret because of the long connection my family has had with this hospital." Nationalization went on, but the charities were determined to try and keep royal patronage alive. Labor was surprised that such a patronage was still needed. There was a silver lining. Now that both the municipal hospitals and the former charitable hospitals were all under the same NHS umbrella, royal patronage could be extended to the municipal hospitals as well. In 1948, Queen Mary had, with regret, resigned as the president of the London Hospital in July 1949, and she and the King returned as joint patron. The Queen felt the same about the St. Mary's, Paddington, of which she was president. Her title was changed to the honorary president, and she remained involved with St. Mary's for the rest of her life. When she had an affection for hospitals, her regiments, and other organizations, she tended to remain with them forever. The least expected was the London Garden Society. She was a patron starting in 1947, and it soon became a favorite. The Queen got a letter thanking her for a visit to the London Cottage back gardens in July 1947. "Dear Ma, we was very pleased to see you at our gardens, and we always say you seem happier when you come amongst the likes of us than in the palace lot, and having to act queen when you ain't been born to it. It must be hard work for you. We liked your pretty clothes, and you are always welcome to come to us when you wants a friend. Our kids and our chaps send their love to you. From all of us with gardens." With the exception of 1953, when she wasn't feeling well, the Queen visited gardens in one London borough or another every year from 1949 to 2001, the last year of her life. The tours originally included about 6 or 7 different gardens, sometimes merely a good window box display at a council flat. By the end of her life, the tour was reduced, and it became a tradition for her to end it with a visit to a police station or fire station where there was some form of garden and where she would join the officers for a drink. All of these visits gave pleasure to generations of London gardeners. The Queen was happy when Princess Elizabeth became pregnant 3 months after her marriage. She and Prince Philip were still living in Buckingham Palace, and the baby was due to be born there November 1948. The home that the king had planned for them at Sunning Hill had burned down. In the summer of 1949, they were able to move to Clarence House, a house rebuilt by Nash in the 1830s for the Duke of Clarence, next to St. James Place. The Queen had a rare disagreement with Tony Lascelles. She wasn't happy to learn that Lascelles had persuaded the king to dispense with the tradition of the House Secretary being in attendance at a royal birth. She asked that the decision be reversed, but Lascelles pointed out that the dominions would also expect to be represented, so that in all there might be 7 ministers sitting outside Princess Elizabeth while she gave birth. The king was horrified and told Lascelles that he would drop the tradition. The Queen felt differently. She feared that the avalanche of reform was sweeping away the old world which she loved and represented. She wrote to Lascelles, "I feel that we should cling to our domestic traditions and ceremonies for dear life." He replied that this one probably had the opposite effect. He wrote, "Surely it is better to dispense with a thing that has no real significance or dignity, rather than to allow it to become a source of friction and bitterness of which there is quite enough in the empire already." He thought the Home Secretary's archaic presence was in fact an unwarrantable and out-of-date intrusion into your Majesty's private lives. The Queen was at last persuaded. During this time she had more things to worry about. Nearing the birth of their first grandchild, it coincided with a serious deterioration in the King's health. The South Africa tour tired him out. He lost 17 pounds in weight in the course of those strenuous weeks. The king through 1948 had been suffering from cramps in the feet and legs. He didn't complain, but he kept a note of it. The problem eased up a bit when he was on holiday at Balmoral. He found he could spend a day on the hills without being tired. But by October 1948, the symptoms had gotten worse. His left foot was numb, and the pain in it kept him awake at night. Then it went to the right foot as well. During this time, it was also very busy. The King and the Queen were preparing for a visit to New Zealand and Australia with Princess Margaret in the spring of 1948. This was going to complement what they had made in South Africa. The King and Queen of Denmark were about to arrive, and October 26th, the King had to preside over a full state opening of Parliament for the first time since the war. The Queen was very concerned, and she told Tony Lascelles that she wanted to talk to him about making a real break for the King for treatment of his legs. She said she wasn't at all happy about it. The King was examined by a team of doctors who agreed that his condition was so serious that he would have to cancel the proposed tour of Australia and New Zealand. The King and Queen were reluctant, but under pressure they agreed. The King refused to cancel his current engagements, which included a review of the Territorial Army and the Remembrance Day service at Cenotaph. November 12th, Professor James Learmonth, one of Britain's leading cardiovascular specialists, examined the King and confirmed that he was suffering from the onset of arteriosclerosis. The doctors feared his right leg might have to be amputated. The Queen explained to Queen Mary, "I have been terribly worried over his legs, and I'm sure the only thing is to put everything off and try to get better. I'm afraid that Australia and New Zealand will be desperately disappointed, but what else could one do? I hope they will understand that it's serious." The King didn't want Princess Elizabeth to know about his condition until after the birth of her child, which was awaited with excitement around the nation. Then, as now, the first news of a royal birth was posted on the railing of the palace. Queen Mary was surprised that scores of people were queuing up all night for the news with sandwiches, like a film queue. Prince Charles was born in the afternoon of Sunday, November 14th. Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip were delighted to be parents. She wrote to her Aunt May Elphinstone that her son was too sweet for words and already has a very loud voice. "I can still hardly believe that I really have a son of my own. It seems quite incredible and wonderful." The Queen, who was to play a large part in her first grandson's life, was very touched by the pleasure people felt at the arrival of such a darling baby. She wrote to Queen Mary, "One has lived through such a series of crises and shocks and blows these last years that something as happy and simple and hopeful for the future as a little son is indeed a joy. So I will end the video on this happy note. The Queen after the war found things changing. The tradition she loved so much seemed to be fading. The Labour Party took over and changed things, and there wasn't anything the King and Queen could do about it. The great news was that Princess Elizabeth was pregnant, and that had to make the royal family very happy. Unfortunately, there was also bad news at the same time. The King was starting to have serious health conditions. This caused the cancellation of the King and the Queen and Princess Margaret from going to New Zealand and Australia. The Queen hoped the people wouldn't be too disappointed. Then by the video's end, Princess Elizabeth had a healthy baby boy, and that is just what the royal family needed to hear at this time in their lives. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated, and it will help to keep the channel growing. As I mentioned before, if you look in the description part of the video, I created a list of merchandise from Amazon that I thought you might be interested in. If you click on the link, it takes you to the Amazon page, and if you purchase anything, I get a small commission that is of no extra cost to you. But more than that, I hope everybody's having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.